My name is Alexa Small. I'm 27 years old, and I'm a first lieutenant in the United States Army. I've commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations, made decisions that have impacted entire operations. But the most painful call of my life didn't come from a battlefield. It came from my own mother, standing in her kitchen in Colorado Springs. After discovering I was the only person in my immediate family not invited to my own sister's wedding, I called to ask why. My mother sighed into the phone, a heavy patronizing sound, and said the words that froze my heart. Honestly, Alexa, your future brother-in-law finds your whole military thing a little intimidating. You're too rigid. We just didn't want you to ruin your sister's big day with that serious face of yours. She hadn't just excluded me. She had turned my entire life, my career, and my sacrifice into something to be ashamed of. She thought she'd successfully pushed me to the margins. But she had no idea she'd just given me the reason to start the most important fight of my life. If you've ever been made to feel like an outsider by your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. The crisp, minimalist order of my apartment near Fort Carson was my sanctuary. Every item had its place, every surface was clean. The silence was my reward after weeks of grueling training exercises in the rolling hills of Colorado. A silence broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator. The air held a faint, familiar mix of black coffee and gun oil, the sense of my profession, my discipline. My hands moved with practiced precision, disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling my camping gear with a series of deliberate, focused motions. This was my version of an encampment. A period of downtime to reset and recharge before the next mission. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a persistent, irritating vibration against the granite. I ignored it, craving a complete disconnect from the outside world. Here, in this space I controlled, there was logic. There was order. It was a world away from the emotional chaos I faced every time I went home. A place where the rules of engagement were always changing, and I was always on the losing side. In my apartment, I was safe. I was grounded. I had no idea the real enemy wasn't overseas, but was about to launch a full-scale assault from within my own family. The phone's relentless buzzing finally broke through my concentration. I sighed, wiping my hands on a rag, and picked it up. A text message from an old high school friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It read, "Hey, you coming back for Nyla's wedding?" I frowned, my brow furrowing in confusion. What wedding? My fingers, suddenly feeling clumsy, tapped open the Instagram app. And in that moment, my orderly, disciplined world shattered. It wasn't one photo, it was dozens. A digital avalanche of celebration that buried me alive. There was Nyla, my sister, beaming in a brilliant white wedding gown at a boutique called Something New. Then a post from my mother, Cynthia, showing off an elegant, cream-colored invitation with gold foil lettering. My aunt had posted a picture of sample floral arrangements. My cousin proudly displayed her sage green bridesmaid dress. Post after post, story after story, dozens of congratulatory comments from people I knew, people I'd grown up with. It was a meticulously planned operation executed over months, a campaign of joy and family togetherness. And I was the only member of the unit who hadn't received the briefing. The most jarring image of all was a photo my mother had posted just yesterday. It was of her, Nyla, and a man I assumed was her fiancé, Travis, sitting at a table at the Broadmoor, the historic five-star hotel in Colorado Springs. An array of decadent desserts was spread before them. The caption read, "Precious family moments tasting cakes for the big day." Precious family moments. It felt like a phantom bullet piercing my chest. No physical pain, just a numbing shock that paralyzed my soul. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately, publicly, and smilingly excluded. My phone rang, jolting me from my stupor. The screen lit up with a single word. Mom. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before breaching a door, and forced my voice to be calm, level. An officer in control. "Mom," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Is there something I don't know?" Cynthia launched into a clumsy performance on the other end, her voice artificially bright. She asked about my work, about the weather, about anything and everything except the one thing that mattered. I saw the pictures of Nyla. I cut her off, my tone leaving no room for evasion. The 3 seconds of silence that followed were a confession. Then, the excuses came, each one deployed like a weapon designed to disarm and diminish me. "Oh, honey, you know your sister," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's just so sensitive, and her fiancé, Travis, well, he's a bit traditional. He thinks a female army officer like you is a little intense." Every word was a calculated strike, devaluing my career, my character, my very being. She was telling me that the strength and discipline the Army had forged in me were liabilities in my own family. But it was her final sentence that served as the kill shot, the one that severed the last thread of hope. "We just want a happy day with no drama, you understand?" The implication was brutally clear. My presence, my quiet, serious, disciplined presence, was the drama. I was the problem to be managed, the variable to be eliminated for the sake of a perfect day. The call ended. The apartment was once again silent, but this time it was a deafening, suffocating silence. I stared at the blank wall opposite my sofa, the wall where I had once planned to hang a large framed family portrait. Now, the emptiness seemed fitting. It was an accurate reflection of my place within that family. The anger didn't erupt in chaos. I didn't throw anything or scream. Instead, a cold, clinical clarity took over, the precision of a soldier assessing a new battlefield. For my entire life, I had charged into my family's emotional combat zones, always playing the role of the rescuer, the fixer, the stable one. Not this time. I picked up my phone, my movements now calm and deliberate. I opened my contacts, then my social media apps. Cynthia Alvarez. A soft tap on the screen. Unfollow. Nyla Alvarez. Another tap. Unfollow. Hector Alvarez, my father, the silent accomplice. Unfollow. Each tap was a decisive action. This wasn't a childish tantrum. This was a tactical retreat. I was cutting the enemy's lines of communication. I was securing my own perimeter. For the first time, the silence wasn't scary. It felt like peace. It felt like the beginning of my own mission. Once the initial shock of the wedding ambush subsided, it didn't leave a void. Instead, a dull, familiar ache settled deep in my bones. It was a pain I recognized, a ghost I'd lived with for years. The tactical retreat I had initiated by unfollowing them online had secured my perimeter from future attacks, but it did nothing to erase the memories of past battles. In the quiet of my apartment, those memories began to surface, not as a flood, but as a series of sharp, distinct flashbacks, each one a scar on my soul. My mind drifted back 2 years. I was on a short leave from Fort Carson, and Nyla was in the middle of one of her signature crises. Her passion project, a boutique coffee shop with mismatched furniture and overpriced lattes, was on the verge of bankruptcy. I found her sobbing at our parents' kitchen table, dramatic tears streaming down her face as she lamented her failing dream. I had just received a $22,000 re-enlistment bonus, a sum earned through years of deployments, missed holidays, and unwavering dedication to my country. Without a second thought, I offered to co-sign the loan that would save her business. My mother had placed a hand on my arm, her eyes filled with a look I now understood as calculated praise. "You're the only hope for this family, Alexa," she'd said, her voice soft. "You've always been the strong one." 6 months later, Nyla abandoned the coffee shop for a fresh start with a new boyfriend in Denver, leaving me solely responsible for the debt. Now, every month, a significant portion of my lieutenant's salary, money earned through sweat, discipline, and days spent far from home, is automatically deducted to pay for someone else's abandoned dream. My sacrifice wasn't acknowledged or appreciated. It was simply expected. It was just my role. A deeper, sharper memory pushed its way forward. The image was so vivid I could almost feel the heat of the May sun on my face. It was my graduation day from the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was, without a doubt, the proudest day of my life. 4 years of relentless academic and physical challenges had culminated in this moment. Standing in my dress gray uniform on the parade ground, I scanned the sea of faces in the crowd, searching for my parents. They were there, but they had arrived late, missing the initial procession. My mother managed to snap a single blurry photo with her phone before they announced they had to leave, almost immediately after the ceremony concluded. The reason? Your sister Neela has terrible allergies, my mother explained, feigning concern. The pollen is just too much for her. We need to get her back to the hotel to rest. I later found out from a cousin that Neela hadn't been suffering from allergies. She had simply been bored and wanted to go shopping at the Woodbury Common outlets. That sting of disappointment became a permanent wound when I visited home a few months later. Walking into the living room, my eyes went to the walls. There wasn't a single photo from my graduation. Not one. But there, taking up an entire corner of the room, was a shrine to Neela. A large professionally framed photo of her wearing her prom queen crown. A smaller one of her holding a cheerleading trophy. Photos from school plays, dance recitals, and birthday parties. My achievement, earned with blood, sweat, and 4 years of my life, was invisible. It couldn't compete with the fleeting, trivial glories of my sister's high school career. I was the decorated officer, but she was the one with the wall of honor. The oldest scar, the one that taught me my first hard lesson, throbbed with a phantom pain. I was 16, working double shifts at a local diner in Colorado Springs, saving every dollar I earned. My goal was a beat-up but reliable old pickup truck, a symbol of the independence I craved. I finally bought it, a faded blue Ford that was my pride and joy. One Friday night, Neela, who was 18, took my keys without asking and went to a party. She got drunk and crashed my truck into a mailbox. When the police arrived, she called me, hysterical. You have to tell them you were driving, she begged, her voice a panicked whisper. A DUI will ruin my future, Lexi. Please. My mother got on the phone, her tone urgent and manipulative. You're stronger, Alexa. You can handle this. Your sister is fragile. And like a good soldier following orders, I did it. I took the fall. I told the police I was behind the wheel. The consequences were swift. My license was suspended, and I had to work even more hours at the diner to pay for the repairs. Nyla's promise to pay me back every penny dissolved into thin air. Another casualty of her careless existence. It was the first time I truly understood that in my family, my reliability wasn't a virtue. It was a curse. My strength wasn't for me, it was for them to use. Sitting there in the encroaching darkness of my apartment, surrounded by the artifacts of a life of service, my neatly folded flag, my service medals, my officer's sword, I finally looked at the map of my own scars. Each memory was a pin on that map, and every road led back to the same devastating truth. I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource. I wasn't a family member. I was a utility. The wedding exclusion wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the latest symptom of a disease that had been poisoning my family for decades. They had designated me the strong one, so they never had to be. They called me reliable, so they could be reckless. They praised my discipline, so they could live in chaos. A question rose in my mind, sharp and clear and forceful as a command shouted across a drill field. If I don't value myself, who will? The question hung in the silent air, demanding not an answer, but a response. It demanded action. And Lieutenant Small was, above all else, a woman of action. In the aftermath of my tactical retreat, I did not allow myself to fall apart. Soldiers don't have that luxury. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I turned my life into a military operation. I called it Operation New Normal. The objective was simple: survive. My day started at 0500 hours. No snooze button, no hesitation, just feet on the cold floor. By 05:15, I was out the door, running my customary 5 miles through the quiet suburban streets. The thin, icy Colorado air burned in my lungs, a clean pain that grounded me in the present moment. At 0600, I was back in my apartment for physical training. Every push-up was an act of defiance, a physical exertion to press the feeling of worthlessness back down into the floor. My breakfast was always the same: 2 scrambled eggs, a bowl of oatmeal, and black coffee. No sugar. My apartment remained spotless, my bed made with crisp hospital corners. Every action was precise, every minute accounted for. This was how I fought back. I couldn't control my family's betrayal, but I could control the square footage of my apartment. I could control my heart rate, my muscle fatigue, every single calorie I consumed. This methodical repetition wasn't a sign of numbness. It was the only life raft I had to keep from drowning in a sea of chaotic emotions. Strength isn't about not feeling pain. It's about being able to function while you're carrying it. But the invisible enemy always finds a way to breach your defenses. The world outside my apartment became a minefield of emotional ambushes. A trip to the King Soopers for groceries turned into a covert operation. Standing in the checkout line, I overheard two women behind me whispering about the upcoming Alvarez girls' wedding. My heart seized in my chest, and I stared intently at a rack of chewing gum, pretending I hadn't heard. At the gym on base, I saw a distant family acquaintance across the weight room. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before he quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by his own shoelaces. Each instance was a small caliber round hitting my self-esteem, reminding me that I was on the outside of a circle I was supposed to belong to. The most direct hit, the one that nearly took me down, came from my own phone. It was a Tuesday night, and I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, a habit I knew I needed to break. And then I saw it. A GoFundMe page, created by my mother. The headline was written in a dramatic, pleading font, "Help Nyla and Travis have their dream honeymoon." The description was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, painting a picture of a young, struggling couple who just needed a little help to start their new life together with a romantic trip to Hawaii. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was so brazen, so utterly shameless. They had not only cut me out, they were now publicly fundraising off the community to celebrate the very event that symbolized my exclusion. They were panhandling for a paradise vacation while a portion of my paycheck, the salary of a U.S. Army officer, was still going toward paying off my sister's last failed business venture. I clicked off the phone, my stomach churning with a cold, hard fury. A few nights later, the solitude became unbearable. The four walls of my apartment, usually a source of comfort and order, began to feel like a prison cell. I grabbed the keys to my pickup truck and just drove, ending up on a scenic overlook, a quiet hill that offered a panoramic view of the twinkling lights of Colorado Springs. I sat there in the cab of my truck, the engine off, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. I didn't cry. Tears felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. Instead, my mind went back to something an army chaplain once told me in Afghanistan, during a particularly dark time. He'd said, "Lieutenant, when all your compasses are broken, you have to find your own true north." I bowed my head against the steering wheel. It wasn't a formal prayer to any specific god, but a quiet, desperate conversation with the universe, or whatever might be listening. "Give me strength," I whispered to the darkness. "Not to forgive them. Not yet. Just give me the strength to get through the day." It wasn't a plea for salvation. It was a soldier's request for the endurance to continue this long, lonely march. And in the silence that followed my prayer, a single, clear thought cut through the fog of my pain. I wasn't entirely alone. I had my own unit, the people who had been through literal fire with me, who understood duty and loyalty in a way my family never could. I reached for my phone, my fingers scrolling through the contacts until they found the name I was looking for. Jenna. My best friend from my first tour, a fellow veteran who now ran a small coffee shop downtown. My thumb hovered over the call button. Every instinct as an officer screamed at me to handle this myself, to not show weakness, to not burden someone else with my problems. But then another thought, a smarter one, took over. A good soldier knows when to call for backup. A smart leader knows that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. I pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, before she picked up. "Jenna," I said, my voice hoarse, cracking just a little around the edges. "You busy?" I need to talk." That call, that simple admission of need, was the first step out of the self-imposed isolation I had built around myself. It was my first move toward a new front line. Jenna's coffee shop was tucked away on a cobblestone side street in old Colorado City. a world away from the sterile, uniform landscape of the military base. She called it the FOB, which stood for Forward Operating Base. For the soldiers and veterans who frequented it, that's exactly what it was. A safe place in a civilian world that often didn't make sense. The air inside was thick with the rich, dark smell of roasting coffee beans and freshly baked pastries. The exposed brick walls were covered with the unit patches of men and women who had served, a colorful tapestry of military history. Black and white photos of soldiers from different eras hung between them, their gazes timeless. As I pushed the door open, a couple of older men sitting at a small table near the window, both wearing VFW hats, looked up. They saw the posture, the way I carried myself. One of them gave me a slow, respectful nod. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said, his voice a low gravel. That simple acknowledgement, that recognition of my rank and service from a complete stranger, hit me with more force than any insult my family had ever thrown at me. Here, I was seen. Before I could even respond, Jenna was out from behind the counter. A fiery redhead with a sleeve of tattoos on her right arm and an energy that could power a small city, she enveloped me in a hug. It wasn't a soft, delicate embrace. It was a solid, grounding, no-nonsense hug that said, "I've got you." "You made it," she murmured into my hair. For the first time in days, the block of ice that had formed around my heart began to melt. I could finally breathe. She led me to a secluded booth in the back corner, away from prying eyes, and set 2 steaming mugs of coffee on the table. "Talk to me, Small," she said, using my old barracks nickname. And so I did. The story tumbled out of me, not in a torrent of tears, but in a low, unsteady voice that cracked on certain words. I told her about the Instagram ambush, the dozens of photos, the feeling of being erased. I told her about my mother's phone call, her voice dripping with pity as she called me intimidating and drama. I even told her about the $22,000 loan, a secret shame I had carried alone for 2 years. Jenna listened, her intense blue eyes never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty platitudes like, "It'll all be okay," or "They probably didn't mean it." She just let me empty the poison that had been circulating in my system. When I finally finished, the silence in our booth was heavy. Jenna shook her head slowly, a look of pure disgust on her face. Then she let out a short, sharp curse word. "A civilian," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "A civilian has the nerve to pass judgment on a U.S. Army lieutenant?" She scoffed. "This Travis guy? He wouldn't last 5 minutes in basic training. He doesn't know the first thing about discipline or integrity." She leaned forward, her expression softening as she looked at me. "And your mom?" "Oh, Alexa." That was it. That was all she needed to say. "Oh, Alexa." It held all the validation, all the righteous anger, all the empathy I'd been starving for. It was the confirmation that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. My pain was real, and it was justified. Someone finally saw it. "Speaking of Mr. Traditional Values," Jenna said, her tone shifting from sympathetic to strategic. She pulled out her phone and started swiping. "A buddy of mine bartends at the Gold Room over at the Broadmoor. He was working last Friday night." She turned the phone around and slid it across the table. The picture was crystal clear. There was Travis, the fiancé who supposedly found me, intense, locked in a passionate kiss with a blonde woman who was definitely not my sister. His hand was placed possessively on the small of her back. Jenna swiped to the next photo. It showed the two of them leaving the bar together, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. "That ain't a friendly handshake, my friend," Jenna said quietly. "That's what we call actionable intel." It was undeniable proof. Another betrayal, but this one wasn't aimed at me. My first, deeply ingrained instinct kicked in. I have to warn Nyla. She was my sister, after all. My job, my lifelong, unspoken job, was to protect her, to clean up her messes, to shield her from pain. I had to tell her. But then I stopped. A slideshow of memories flashed through my mind. My mother's dismissive tone on the phone, the empty space on the living room wall where my graduation photo should have been. the crushing weight of that $22,000 debt. All the times I had put my own needs aside to rescue them, only to be pushed away when I was no longer useful. Jenna watched me, her gaze knowing. She could see the internal battle raging in my eyes. "What are you gonna do?" she asked gently. I stared at the picture of Travis and his blonde companion, at the casual betrayal, frozen in time. Then I looked up at Jenna, and a new, cold resolve settled over me. The emotional fog had lifted, replaced by the clarity of a field commander. I finally understood the rules of this new engagement. "I wasn't invited to this operation, remember?" I said, my voice steady and firm. "This isn't my fight." The decision was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to charge onto Nyla's battlefield to save her. I wasn't going to absorb the shrapnel from her bad decisions. I was going to let the consequences play out exactly as they were meant to. I was going to stand down. A few days after my meeting with Jenna, my newly established perimeter was breached. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound in my quiet apartment. Through the peephole, I saw my father, Hector, shifting his weight awkwardly on my doorstep. He was holding a glass Pyrex dish, a familiar sight that sent a jolt of warring emotions through me. I opened the door but didn't move from the threshold, creating a physical barrier. "Your mother made lasagna," he said, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He held the dish out to me. The rich, warm smell of garlic, oregano, and slow-cooked tomatoes, the scent of my childhood, of happy Sunday dinners, wafted into my apartment. But now, it smelled like a trap. It smelled of manipulation. This wasn't food. It was a weaponized peace offering, a Trojan horse made of pasta and cheese. "What do you need, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat, cutting through the pretense. He shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with my directness. "Nyla's just so stressed with the wedding," he began, reciting the lines he'd obviously been given. "Your mother's worried sick. They miss you, Alexa. A family should be together at a time like this." He was on a mission, dispatched by my mother, the commanding officer of our family's dysfunctional army. His objective, to soften my defenses with a dose of nostalgia and guilt. I didn't take the bait. I didn't take the lasagna. "What do you need?" I repeated, my gaze unwavering. He finally broke, his shoulders slumping. "You're not coming to the wedding," he said, stating the obvious. "But there's something you could help with." He explained that Neela, in typical Nyla fashion, had blown her entire budget on the wedding dress and the venue. Now, just weeks before the big day, she didn't have the $2,000 needed for the security deposit on the new apartment she and Travis were supposed to move into. "Your mother and we don't have it right now," he mumbled, his voice dropping. He looked up at me, his expression pleading. "Just this once, Alexa. Think of it as your wedding gift to your sister. Your mother said you've always been the generous one." The sheer, unmitigated gall of the request stunned me into silence. It was a tactical masterpiece of emotional exploitation. They exclude me from the wedding, humiliate me, and then send my father to my door to ask for money to fund the life I'm not invited to be a part of. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't even family anymore. I was a line of credit, an ATM. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, crystallizing the resolve that had been forming since I saw those pictures on Instagram. The internal conflict, the brief, painful tug-of-war between the child who loved her dad's lasagna and the woman who refused to be a doormat, was over. The woman had won. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a gavel. Hector stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I don't think he had ever heard me say that word to him with such finality. But it's your sister," he stammered, falling back on the oldest play in their book. "What's she going to do if she doesn't have a place to live?" I looked my father squarely in the eye, forcing him to see the stranger he and my mother had created. "That is no longer my problem, Dad," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as steel. "That is Nyla's problem, and it's Travis's problem. The man she chose. The man you all decided was more important than me." I pointed a finger at the Pyrex dish in his hands. "And take this back to Mom," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Tell her I can't be bought. My loyalty isn't that cheap." Every word was a truth I had swallowed for years, and now I was finally spitting them out. I could see the confusion and defeat wash over my father's face. He was a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict, and I had just declared war. He took a step back, turned without another word, and walked away, the rejected lasagna still in his hands. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the silent apartment. I leaned my back against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. A tremor ran through my hands. I had successfully defended my position, but I knew this was just a skirmish. The real battle was yet to come. This passive resistance, this silent retreat, wasn't enough. Hiding in my apartment while they sent envoys to wear me down was no way to live. I couldn't exist in a state of permanent siege. An officer knows that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. You need a preemptive strike. You have to face the enemy's command structure head-on. The anger and the pain inside me coalesced into a single, decisive thought. I walked to the small table by the door, grabbed my truck keys, and pulled on my jacket. It was time to go to their headquarters. It was time to talk to my mother, face to face, and this time there would be no interruptions, no evasions, and no retreat. The 10-minute drive to the house I grew up in felt like the longest journey of my life. Every stoplight, every turn, was filled with a cold, hard purpose. This wasn't a retreat into old family dynamics. It was a full frontal assault on them. When I pulled my familiar blue pickup truck into the driveway, I didn't hesitate. I didn't sit in the cab and second-guess myself. I cut the engine, grabbed my keys, and walked to the front door. I didn't knock. I used my own key, a worn brass key that had been on my key ring for over a decade, slid it into the lock, and walked straight into the heart of their headquarters. The scene in the living room was a tableau of such breathtaking hypocrisy that it froze the blood in my veins. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence I needed. The visceral confirmation that my father's visit wasn't a desperate plea from a concerned parent, but a calculated move in their ongoing game of emotional and financial exploitation. My mother, Cynthia, and my sister, Nyla, were perched on the sofa like two pampered queens holding court. Nyla was holding a small, ornate hand mirror, turning her head from side to side, admiring a glittering diamond necklace that was draped elegantly around her throat. Beside them on the polished wood coffee table sat an open, pastel-colored box of expensive French macarons, each one a perfect little jewel of sugar and air. There was absolutely no sign of the financial distress or crippling wedding stress my father had so pathetically described. This was not a scene of hardship. This was a celebration, funded by delusion and entitlement. "Oh, Travis is just the most wonderful man," Cynthia was cooing, her eyes sparkling with a materialistic delight that I knew all too well. "My beautiful daughter deserves nothing but the best in the world." My sudden appearance in the entryway was like a grenade tossed into their private party. The sound of my boots on the hardwood floor made them both look up. Their laughter died in their throats, the cheerful atmosphere instantly evaporating. Nyla's smile vanished as if wiped away, and Cynthia's face, for a split second, registered a flicker of genuine shock and perhaps even fear, before she expertly masked it with a practiced, maternal warmth. "Alexa," she chirped, jumping to her feet with a theatrical grace. She forced a brilliant smile that didn't come close to reaching her cold eyes. "Honey, what a wonderful surprise. You're just in time. You have to come see the beautiful necklace Travis bought for your sister." It was a masterful performance in denial, an attempt to bulldoze reality. She was acting as if my father had never come to my apartment, as if my cold, hard no was just a minor misunderstanding, a little hiccup that could be smoothed over with shiny objects and feigned affection. Nyla, her face now pale and blotchy, quickly and clumsily fumbled with the clasp at the back of her neck, trying to remove the necklace as if it were incriminating evidence. "We were just..." She started to stammer, her eyes darting nervously between me and my mother. "Just what?" I cut her off, my voice dangerously quiet, slicing through her excuse before it could even form. I walked further into the room, my movements deliberate, and placed my truck keys on the coffee table with a sharp, definitive clack. The sound was loud in the tense silence, a clear signal. The ceasefire was over. The battle had begun. "Were you spending other people's money?" Or were you planning the Hawaiian honeymoon funded by strangers on the internet while your little sister is still paying off your six-figure debt? Cynthia immediately went on the offensive, her voice taking on the sharp, wounded tone she reserved for when her authority was challenged. She launched into her classic, time-honored script of deflection and blame. You are blowing things way out of proportion. Why do you always have to be so selfish? Why do you have to ruin everything? This is supposed to be a happy time for your sister. But this time, the words had no power. They were like bullets bouncing off armor. I didn't flinch. I didn't retreat. I met her attack head-on. Selfish? A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound in that perfectly decorated room. You want to talk about selfish? I paid $22,000 to bail out her failed passion project. I took the fall for her DUI when she got drunk and crashed my truck, losing my license so she wouldn't have a record. I missed my own West Point graduation, a day I worked for my entire life, because of her supposed pollen allergy. I have sent money home every single month for the past 10 years, money I earned thousands of miles from home. You dare to stand there and call me selfish? My gaze shifted to Neela, who was now shrinking into the sofa cushions, trying to make herself as small as possible. She looked like a child, utterly unable to face the consequences of her actions. And you, I said, my voice dripping with the righteous contempt I had suppressed for a lifetime. When are you going to grow up and stop coasting on everyone else's sacrifice? Do you ever stop your endless pursuit of pretty things to think about what I had to give up? What I had to go without so you could play house and chase your next fleeting dream? That's enough, Cynthia shrieked, her mask of composure finally cracking. Enough, I roared back, and the force of my voice, the full power of a commanding officer used to being obeyed without question, slammed them both into a stunned silence. They both flinched as if struck, their eyes wide with a fear I had never seen from them before. They had never heard this voice, never met this version of me. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline surge through me, and when I spoke again, my voice was lower, but it was filled with an unshakable authority. From this moment on, it is over. The Bank of Alexa is officially closed. The Alexa Rescue Service is no longer in operation. I am not your backup plan. I am not your safety net. I am done. I locked eyes with my mother, the architect of this entire toxic system, the woman who taught me that my worth was measured only by my usefulness to others. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose your perfect, fragile daughter. You chose your son-in-law and his delicate feelings. You chose everyone and everything over me. Fine. Now you can live with that choice. My words came out, one after another, like precise, targeted strikes, dismantling their world piece by piece. Don't ever call me for money. Don't ever call me to solve a crisis. Don't ever call me again. If you have ever felt that incredible, terrifying, and ultimately freeing moment of finally standing up for yourself, please support this story by hitting that like button, and let me know in the comments by just writing, I found my voice. I turned my back on them, on the suffocating history contained within those four walls. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I walked to the door, leaving them sitting there, utterly stunned and speechless in the wreckage of the world they had so carelessly built on my back. As the front door closed behind me with a solid, final click, I wasn't filled with pain or regret or sadness. For the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the clean, sharp, exhilarating feeling of freedom. On the day of Nyla's wedding, I was not at home, stewing in resentment. I was not scrolling through social media, torturing myself with images of the celebration I was excluded from. Instead, I was miles above the city, hiking a trail on Cheyenne Mountain with Jenna. The air was thin and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. The only sounds were the chirping of birds, the rustle of wind through the aspens, and the steady rhythm of our boots on the gravel path. I had made a conscious decision to go on radio silence. My phone was off, tucked deep inside my backpack. I had chosen peace over poison, tranquility over turmoil. I had removed myself from the combat zone, and up here, surrounded by the quiet majesty of the Rockies, I felt a profound sense of calm. We hiked for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Old army stories, Jenna's plans for her coffee shop, my upcoming training schedule. There was an easy comfort between us, the kind forged only through shared hardship. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail, we made our way back down to the trailhead where my truck was parked. The moment we got back into the cab, I pulled out my phone and powered it on. The device immediately came to life with a convulsive shudder, vibrating uncontrollably against the dashboard as a tidal wave of notifications flooded in. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages. My screen was a chaotic explosion of alerts. Jenna just raised an eyebrow. Popular girl. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't popularity, this was a crisis. The first text that loaded was from a high school friend. OMG Alexa, have you seen what's happening at the Broadmoor? The next was from a cousin. Call me immediately. All hell has broken loose. Then, a message with a link from a local Colorado Springs news outlet. The headline, in bold, sensational letters, read, $1 million wedding turns into royal rumble. Groom assaults bride at the Broadmoor. My blood ran cold. Jenna and I exchanged a wide-eyed look. Without a word, I tapped the link. The news page loaded, and embedded at the top was a video, already boasting hundreds of thousands of views. I hit play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a cell phone by a wedding guest, but the images were brutally clear. It started mid-argument. One of Nyla's bridesmaids, her face a mask of fury, threw the contents of a champagne flute directly into Travis's face. Travis, his tuxedo now stained and dripping, didn't even flinch. He just laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Then he roared, his voice booming over the shocked gasps of the guests. What do you think I'm marrying you for? Your train wreck family and your gold-digging mother. The camera then panned to Nyla. Her perfect, expensive wedding dress was askew, her elaborate hairstyle coming undone. Her face was contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief. You slept with her, she screamed, her voice raw. You slept with my maid of honor right before our wedding. Travis's face, already flushed with anger and alcohol, turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. So what if I did? He yelled back, taking a menacing step toward her. You should be grateful I'm marrying you at all. And then, in front of hundreds of their closest friends and family, he swung. His hand connected with the side of Nyla's face with a sickening crack that was audible even on the grainy video. She stumbled backward, collapsing onto the pristine white aisle runner in a heap of satin and tulle. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Screams, shouting, people rushing forward. The video ended abruptly. Jenna and I sat in stunned silence in the cab of my truck, the sounds of the mountain fading into the background. The family drama my mother was so desperate to avoid had just become a public spectacle, a viral sensation. The perfect image they had sacrificed me to protect had been utterly and irrevocably destroyed, by themselves. As if on cue, my phone began to ring. The screen lit up with the name that had brought me so much pain. Mom! Jenna looked at me, her expression a mixture of concern and grim resolve. I took a single, deep breath, held it for a beat, and then answered, putting the call on speakerphone. My mother's voice was a torrent of hysterical, sobbing panic. Alexa! Oh God, Alexa, you have to get here right now. It's a disaster. Your sister, Travis. The police are here. You have to come fix this. Fix this. The two words that had defined my entire existence within that family. This was the moment of truth. The old Alexa, the one programmed for duty and rescue, would already have the truck in gear, racing down the mountain to clean up a mess she didn't create. But the old Alexa was gone. She had died in that living room a few days ago. I can't, Mom, I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any emotion. What do you mean, you can't? She shrieked. Your family needs you. I looked out the windshield at the setting sun, at the peaceful world I had chosen for myself, and I delivered the final, liberating blow. No, I replied, my voice as steady as stone. The family decided they didn't need me. Remember, I wasn't on the guest list. I'm not part of this operation. I paused, letting the words sink in. Good luck. And then, I hung up. In the profound silence that followed, Jenna simply reached over and squeezed my shoulder. It was a gesture of quiet, unwavering support. It was the most important victory of my life, and I hadn't fired a single shot. The fallout from the wedding implosion was swift and brutal. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as the Alvarez family name became synonymous with scandal in Colorado Springs. Travis was formally charged with assault, and his wealthy family, mortified by the public disgrace, completely disowned him. They also hired a team of lawyers to sue my parents for the full cost of the wedding, citing misrepresentation and emotional distress. The viral video meant there was nowhere for my mother and sister to hide. They became prisoners in their own home, facing a storm of public shame and a looming financial catastrophe. To make matters worse, Neela's landlord, having seen the video and not wanting a media circus at his property, informed her that her lease would not be renewed. She and her children were facing eviction. Every door, it seemed, had slammed shut in their faces. I observed all of this with a strange sense of detachment. The chaos was happening, but it was happening behind a thick wall of glass. I had built my boundary, and for the first time, their crisis was not my own. Then, about a week after the wedding that wasn't, a torrential rainstorm swept through the city. It was late, close to midnight, when my doorbell rang. I knew, with a sinking certainty, who it would be. I opened the door to find my father, Hector, standing on my doorstep, drenched and defeated. The rain had plastered his hair to his scalp, and his shoulders were slumped under the weight of a world that had finally crumbled. The evasiveness he usually wore like a shield was gone, replaced by raw, unvarnished desperation. "I need to talk to you, Alexa," he said, his voice pleading. I stepped aside and let him in, gesturing to the small chair in my living room. He sat down, dripping water onto my clean floor, and didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the full extent of their ruin: the lawsuit from Travis's family, Nyla's impending eviction, the hounding calls from vendors demanding payment. And then he delivered the final, devastating blow. The one that explained everything. "The house," he said, his voice cracking. "The bank is going to foreclose on our house." I listened, my expression unreadable. This was the final card, the ace of spades in their deck of manufactured crises. "How?" I asked, my voice calm. He confessed everything. It turned out that years ago my mother had convinced him to take out a huge home equity line of credit, a HELOC against their house, a loan for $75,000. He admitted that the money I'd been sending home every month for the last 10 years, the money I believed was going toward paying off their primary mortgage, was instead being used to make the minimum payments on this secret, high-interest loan. My money wasn't building their security. It was merely keeping the wolves from the door, funding their illusion of a comfortable middle-class life. He detailed the expenses with the weary resignation of a man who had been hiding a secret for too long. The money had gone everywhere: Nyla's failed coffee shop, credit card debt, even a down payment on a new car for her. Then came the most sickening admission of all. "To keep up appearances with Travis's family," he mumbled, staring at his hands, We used some of the loan money for the gifts. To make it look like he was being generous, to make Nyla look desirable." The air in my apartment grew thick and heavy. I processed his words, my mind working like a computer. "What gifts?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "The diamond engagement ring," he confessed. And the necklace she was wearing, the one from the wedding." A wave of ice-cold numbness washed over me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was the profound shock of understanding the true depth of their deception. My money, the money I had earned through sacrifice and service, the money I had sent home out of a sense of duty and love, had been funneled through a secret loan to purchase the very symbols of my own exclusion. I had paid for the expensive jewelry that celebrated the union I was deemed too intimidating to attend. The betrayal was so complete, so grotesquely perfect, that it was almost poetic. My father's confession wasn't born of remorse. It was born of sheer desperation. They had exhausted all other options. Now they needed me one last time, not as a daughter, but as a financial savior, to rescue them from utter ruin. Your mother, he trailed off, his voice weak. She said it was the only way for Nyla to have a stable life. She said you would understand. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, my face an emotionless mask. My lack of a hysterical reaction seemed to frighten him more than any outburst would have. When he had finished, when all the secrets were laid bare between us, I didn't offer comfort. I didn't scream or cry. I shifted into mission mode. Did you bring the paperwork? I asked, my voice clinical. He looked up, confused. What? The HELOC documents. The bank statements. Do you have them? He nodded numbly, reaching into the drenched inner pocket of his jacket and pulling out a wrinkled, damp manila folder. He handed it to me. I took the documents, laid them out on my kitchen table, and, with my father watching in silence, I used my phone to take clear, methodical pictures of every single page. I was no longer a daughter listening to her father's troubles. I was an investigator gathering evidence. I was collecting my ammunition. When I was done, I handed the folder back to him. Thank you for telling me the truth, Dad, I said, and the iciness in my tone made him flinch. I'll be in touch to arrange a meeting. With everyone. He stood up and walked to the door like a man in a daze. As he stepped back out into the pouring rain, I think he finally realized his mistake. He hadn't come here to find a rescuer. He had just armed his own prosecutor. 2 days after my father's confession, I sent a single, concise email. It was not a request. It was a summons. The recipients were Cynthia Alvarez, Hector Alvarez, and Nyla Alvarez. The subject line read, Urgent Family Meeting. The body of the email was brief and non-negotiable. We need to have an emergency family meeting, Saturday 10 a.m. sharp at the offices of Judge Miller. Aunt Carol will also be in attendance. The topic will be the financial status of your home. Your presence is mandatory. I knew the names I had included were tactical weapons. Judge Miller was a retired JAG officer and a respected family friend, a man whose entire life was built on principle and law. My Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, was the formidable widow of a Marine colonel and the undisputed matriarch of the extended family. She was a woman of unwavering integrity, and no one, not even my mother, dared to cross her. By summoning them to a neutral, authoritative location in the presence of 2 unimpeachable witnesses, I had taken away all of my mother's power. There would be no emotional outbursts, no guilt tripping, no storming off to another room. This would be a court of truth, not a family squabble. On Saturday morning, the air in Judge Miller's small wood-paneled conference room was thick with tension. The walls were lined with leather-bound law books, and a faint scent of old paper and polish hung in the air. My mother, father, and Nyla were seated on one side of the long, polished mahogany table. They looked anxious and out of their depth, like defendants awaiting a verdict. My mother kept smoothing down her skirt, a nervous tic I recognized. Nyla stared blankly at the table, while my father just looked old and tired. On the other side of the table sat my allies. Judge Miller, with his stern but fair expression, sat at the head. To my left was Aunt Carol, her back ramrod straight, her gaze sharp and discerning. I sat between them, my own posture reflecting years of military discipline. I had a single manila folder in front of me. Judge Miller cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. Alexa has requested this meeting to discuss a serious matter. Alexa, the floor is yours. I stood up, my movements calm and measured. I felt no nerves, only a profound sense of clarity. Thank you, Judge. Aunt Carol. I nodded to them before turning my attention to the other side of the table. I'm not here to talk about my feelings. I'm not here to talk about a wedding. I'm here to talk about facts and numbers. I opened the folder. On August 4th, 7 years ago, a home equity line of credit for $75,000 was taken out against the family home. I began, my voice as steady as if I were delivering a mission briefing. I slid a copy of the loan origination document across the table. For the past 10 years, I have been sending home a monthly allotment, which I was told was going toward the primary mortgage. However, bank records show that my money was, in fact, being used exclusively to service the interest on this HELOC. I laid out another sheet of paper, a spreadsheet I'd painstakingly created, tracing the flow of money. This loan was used to pay for, among other things, Nyla's failed business venture, credit card debt, and various personal expenses. I paused, letting the weight of the facts settle in the room. Nyla began to sniffle, a soft, pathetic sound. My father sank lower in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Only my mother stared back, her expression hardening into one of defiance. Then I delivered the final, devastating piece of evidence. Furthermore, a significant portion of this debt, which my monthly paychecks were servicing, was used to purchase luxury gifts from Travis to Nyla, specifically the diamond engagement ring and the diamond necklace she was given. I looked directly at my mother. In effect, my money was laundered through a loan to pay for the very symbols of a life I was deemed unworthy to be a part of. Nyla let out a choked sob. My father didn't move. My mother, however, finally broke her silence. I only ever wanted what was best for your sister, she snapped, her voice high and shrill. A mother does what she has to do. Before I could respond, Aunt Carol spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. What was best for her, Cynthia? She asked, her eyes boring into my mother. To defraud your other daughter? To teach Nyla that her life could be built on the back of someone else's sacrifice? To raise her to believe that there are no consequences? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. That is not love. That is profound selfishness. And you have crippled them both with it. My mother deflated, all the fight draining out of her. She had no defense against Aunt Carol's moral authority. The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. I had them, I had the facts, the witnesses, and the moral high ground. I looked at my parents, not as their daughter, but as the opposing party in a negotiation. You have two options, I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. Option 1, you will sell the undeveloped plot of land adjacent to the house. The proceeds from that sale will be used to pay off the HELOC in full. And the remainder will be wired directly to me to repay every dollar I've sent home for the last 10 years. We will all sign a legally binding agreement to that effect today. I paused, letting them absorb the first option before delivering the second. Option 2. I will walk out of this room, drive to the district attorney's office, and file a formal criminal complaint for felony fraud. The evidence is all here. I tapped the folder. The choice is yours. The silence was absolute. My mother looked utterly broken. Nyla was openly weeping. There was no way out, no one to manipulate, no one left to blame. Then, my father, Hector, did something I had never seen him do in my entire life. He sat up straight, lifted his head, and looked directly at his wife. All the weakness, all the avoidance, was gone. In its place was a quiet, weary resolve. That's enough, Cynthia, he said, his voice firm. It's over. He turned his gaze to me. We'll sell the land. The war was over. I hadn't won by shouting. I hadn't won by crying. I had won with the undeniable, unstoppable force of the truth. The sale of the land was handled quickly and impersonally through lawyers. A few weeks after the meeting at Judge Miller's office, a large sum of money was wired into my bank account. When I saw the notification on my phone, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or a thrill of victory. I just felt closure. It was the quiet, definitive sound of a heavy door closing on a painful chapter of my life. The money wasn't a prize, it was a restitution. It was the period at the end of a very long and difficult sentence. Instead of keeping it all for myself, I met with a financial advisor. I used the majority of the funds to establish 2 irrevocable educational trust funds, one for each of Nyla's children. When I told Jenna what I had done, she looked at me with a mix of surprise and pride. After everything they put you through, you're still giving it back? She asked. This isn't about Nyla, I explained, looking out the window of the fob. This is about making sure the next generation has a fair start. It's about breaking the cycle. They deserve a future that isn't dependent on manipulation or sacrifice. It was the act of a leader, not a victim. It was my way of ensuring that the toxicity ended with my generation. 6 months passed. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. At Fort Carson, I was promoted to the rank of major, a brass oak leaf now pinned to my uniform. My small apartment, once a sterile sanctuary from the world, had transformed into a warm and welcoming space. On weekends, it was often filled with the easy laughter of my chosen family, Jenna and a few other veteran friends who would come over for cookouts on my small balcony. We were a unit, bound by shared experiences and mutual respect. My relationship with my parents became one of distant, formal courtesy. They still lived in the house, but the power dynamic was gone. They no longer held any emotional or financial sway over me. Our communication was limited to polite, generic birthday and Christmas cards. There were no more panicked phone calls, no more manufactured crises. There was only a vast, quiet space where a relationship used to be. They had lost their safety net, and I had gained my freedom. The biggest surprise came from Nyla. The spectacular implosion of her wedding had been the brutal rock bottom she desperately needed. Forced to stand on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life, she began to change. She got 2 jobs, one as a waitress, another stocking shelves at a grocery store. She rented a small, simple apartment for herself and her kids, and for the first time, she was paying her own bills. The helplessness she had worn like a cloak for years was slowly being replaced by a quiet competence. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I tensed up, old habits dying hard, but she wasn't there to ask for anything. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. In her hand, she held a small velvet box. "I wanted you to have this," she said, her voice soft. She opened the box to reveal our grandfather's antique silver pocket watch, the one our father had given to her years ago. "It belongs to the one who deserves it." It was more than just a watch. It was an admission. It was an apology. It was the first gesture of genuine respect she had ever shown me. It was a peace offering on a new foundation, one built on the hard-earned ground of boundaries and truth. I accepted it, a silent acknowledgement of her long-overdue transformation. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony, a warm mug of tea in my hands. The sky over the Front Range was a breathtaking canvas of orange, pink, and purple as the sun set behind the majestic silhouette of Pikes Peak. The mountain stood silent and strong, a permanent fixture against the changing sky, and I felt a kinship with it. I had weathered my own storms, and I was still standing. I opened the journal I'd started keeping, a place to process the long journey back to myself. On a clean page, I wrote down the lesson that had cost me so much to learn, the truth that had finally set me free. "The sweetest revenge, the greatest victory, is peace," I wrote. "Peace isn't something that other people give you. It's a territory you must be willing to fight for, and once you have claimed it, you must defend its borders at all costs." Major Alexa Small had finally completed her most difficult mission. She had come home, truly come home, to herself. That journal entry is where my old story ended and my new one truly began. The journey to get here was the hardest I've ever faced. Harder than any deployment, tougher than any training exercise. But the peace I fought for is real, and it was worth every single step. If my story has resonated with you, if you've ever had to build a boundary to reclaim your own territory, please know you are not alone. This channel is a community for survivors like us. Please support our mission by liking this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of our own strength. Thank you for listening to my debriefing.